Oh, hi. Good afternoon. I'm Rick Ellis, and I am standing in for Bud Ivey. First of all, before I get going, I want to find out how many people have heard of Ivey Sol. Raise your hands. I know these two have. Well, good. So I know basically the audience that I'll be presenting to. That's good. First time. Well, Bud Ivey started the company about 30 years ago. He was a chemist who came up with the idea, and I am a professional geologist I work with Bud some of the time. And the reason why I love doing these presentations for him is because it works, and I'm telling you, it does. And so, without any further ado. We're an international company, award-winning, and we have patented several different types of substances. The primary and the first one was Ivey Sol, and then now we have Decon It, which is a way to decon equipment, and also PFAS Sol, which is something we're currently in development stage. We'll guarantee our product that it will work for you. And now, it doesn't work in every application, of course, but it works in most applications, remedial applications. And it improves the physical, biological, and chemical remediation of soil, bedrock, and groundwater. There are lots of testimonials out there, some on this table, some in that other room I heard just a few minutes ago. There's journal papers, lots of them, case studies and awards, and they speak to the efficacy of this substance. Like I said, it's globally distributed, and I wasn't kidding. 6 of the 7 continents. I don't think we'll be in Antarctica anytime soon, but it's possible, I guess. All right, so it can be used in situ and ex situ. So on the left, you see NAPL. Can a surfactant clean an NAPL site? Well, yes, I've seen it happen. There is a vial with some floating product, and the 2 vials on the right are after it's been impacted by Ivey Sol and put into solution. And there is a DNAPL with the same sort of scenario. And here's some ex situ results before and after with soil, or it looks like sand. And here's with frac sand. That's an interesting application. So let's go a little bit into the basic chemistry. I would assume that most of you have had some basic chemistry to start with, but I'm not going to make this very deep. I'm a geologist. Oh, sorry for you geochemists out there. Well, oil has limited solubility in groundwater, as we know, and hence the contaminants will actually absorb to the soil surfaces, and they aggregate, and they form globules, and you get, or NAPL, non-aqueous phase liquid. And what that does is it reduces the availability for remediation. Why? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Right here, this shows on the left some contamination on a macro particle, he called it. And then, some contamination dissolved in the water. And then on the right, it shows less absorbed contaminants and the dissolved contaminants in the water. That would be after application. Okay. So again, it's a physical, biological, and chemical process. It helps with all of those. Now, here's a very simplified illustration of soil. You see the grains or the soil. The white is vapor, the blue is water, obviously, and contamination, or you could say it, NAPL, a residual product. Let's take a closer look at that. Okay, there's the contamination, there's the vapor. Yeah. Now, interfacial tension. Interfacial tension is something we'll be talking about quite a bit today, and that's what keeps that that product suspended there. And there you see it floating there. Interfacial tension between phases. Well, this is something pretty interesting that I didn't learn in chemistry. Probably should have, I don't know. But water clusters have an interfacial tension of 73 dynes. And L-NAPL and D-NAPL have an interfacial tension of 21 to 23 dynes. So you have tension there, interfacial tension. Now, NAPL molecules at the molecular interface between the two phases, they actually reorganize to cause a net increase in NAPL tension to greater than 30 dynes. Now, here's another illustration that shows grains and surface tension, and you see pore pressures there. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but it's just another illustration showing these interfacial tension, these contacts. And these contacts is where Ivey salt is going to do its work. Okay, right there. And there's a globule, and there's sorbed contamination in the soil, or it could even be bedrock. Okay? And that's where Ivey salt does its work. So, contaminant aggregation, what are we talking about? Well, contaminant aggregation is the sticking together of organic molecules, one to another, onto surfaces, or sorption. Of course, you have adsorption and absorption. Adsorption is, what was that? It's okay. Adsorption would be on the surface itself, and absorption would be when it goes into the matrix. Okay. So like attracts like. There's a picture of some nasty soil. Aggregation can be viewed as unwanted surface sorption to a mass forming globules or ganglia. And these lead to L-NAPL and D-NAPL layer formation. They can. And Bud loves analogies, and one of them he likes is this one with arteries, and it shows here clogging of arteries. Now, within geology, there's a good relationship between the pore throats in the subsurface and your arteries. So, what do I mean by that? A normal artery is clear. That'd be a clear pore throat, would be the analogy. And then initial stages of arteriosclerosis, significant arteriosclerosis, and heaven forbid, the last stage. Yeah, thank goodness I haven't hit that yet. So the diameter of pore openings in soil are actually significantly less than the diameter of a hair, and which is significantly less than veins. So let's see. So there's an artery, there's a vein, there's a hair. Well, it's all relative, of course. And then there's a soil pore. That's interesting. That interested me. I didn't realize that they were typically that small. Okay, so this is another good graphic that shows how Ivey salt works in general. So you see the absorbed contamination. They can be ab or adsorbed. You get L-NAPL, D-NAPL globules of sorbed layers there. And then you see the Ivey salt chemical that has the tail and the head. And what it does is it forms something called a partial micelle. Certain types of surfactants will actually create a micelle. And you don't like micelles because they tend to, what they do is they encapsulate the entire thing, the entire contaminant, and they clog up wastewater treatment systems and the like. So Ivey salt does very well with it in that sense. It selectively desorbs NAPL below the CMC, or the critical micelle concentration. That's critical micelle concentration. And that, again, increases physical, biological, and chemical availability for enhanced remediation. Yeah. So here's a water droplet. We've all seen this before on sand. What's going on there? Well, you got of course, the basic chemistry, of course, H2O. And the polarity is what he's trying to show there. Now, what happens? There's hydrogen bonding between hydrogen molecules. So there you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 molecules of water, right? But there's bonding together, so it forms a cluster. Look, this is what it looks like. Isn't that crazy? That's a three-dimensional cluster with surface tension of 73 dynes. We talked about that earlier. So this water cluster actually hinders its ability to move through those really small pores that I was talking about. Interesting. So what does Ivey Sol do? It makes those clusters smaller so that they can enter through the finer grained soils or through those really small pore throats. So it lowers the surface tension below 30. So this is a nice diagram showing what happens with Ivey Sol. It decreases the size of those clusters. And this shows the overcoming of the facial tension interfacial tension we talked about earlier. So you see water has water's on the left, L-NAPL, D-NAPL on the right. Water has that higher interfacial tension of 73, as we said before, and L-NAPL, D-NAPL at 21 and 23. Well, you add this Ivey Sol, and then it starts to, it overcomes that interfacial tension. Clearly, that would help with remediation. Okay. So this, this diagram shows just the movement through the soil, just another way to show access. And, you got to access the contamination to get it out. That's one of the basic things, of course. That's why conceptual site models and good geology is paramount. And if you, so Ivey Sol does a great job of accessing through these small places and overcoming surface tension. And this just shows, a simplified diagram of how it works. Okay. Now, how about in a bigger scale? So in the field, how do we apply this stuff? There's lots of ways to apply it, in situ, ex situ. But the way that Bud typically suggests is something pretty simple. It's push-pull and or sweep. So this shows a cross-section of some injection with injection diffusion radius, IDR. So you just inject it, and you can gravity feed it, and then you just then you can remove it, either from the same wells or from adjacent wells if you want to draw it, if you want to sweep it. More recently, he's used the application has been horizontal wells, so it works well with horizontal wells, and it just shows that. Now here's a case study. I got 2 case studies today. This one is from Queens. It's a surfactant enhanced recovery of separate phase petroleum hydrocarbons. Okay. So it's a large site, 130 acres, and it's a Superfund site, over 100 years of service, so lots of contamination. And just shows, okay, so this is where you might be able to see the dual phase extraction system. You see the railroad tracks and then go southeast of that, and then you see the dual phase extraction system. And then you see a little inset down there. Anyway, so you can see where the contamination is, and ISO concentration lines. There it is in real life. Okay, so they used a dual phase vapor extraction system. How did it do? Well, these systems, I've definitely used them before. They tend to work quite well, and they typically work very, very well at the beginning. And same with this site. 84% of recovery occurred within the first 5 months of operation. Total product recovered 1,883 gallons. But then, as a lot of sites do, it started to near asymptotic conditions. So what do? You bring in Ivey Sol. So this is injection areas where they had us inject. And of course, it was the most contaminated portions is where we did it. It was gravity fed with geoprobe. And they experimented to figure out the water ratios, the surfactant to water ratios. And I believe this was quite a few years ago, this site. So they were still experimenting with some of the ratios. The extraction, they removed at least 1.5 to 3 times the injection volume, and they continued until no surfactant was present. They used a field surfactant test. It's very simple. It's just a card that you put droplets on, and if the droplets are flat, then it shows that it has surfactant. And if they're beaded up like we saw it on the sand, then that's water, clean water. But they would extract from injection point or the nearby injection well. Now this is kind of cool, and Tim's going to help me with this one. Okay, here we go. So this is a conceptual model of how it works, basically. It's somewhat of a typical site. IDR there is the diameter, the ratio. And then it shows, okay, so the gravity-fed Ivey saw is put in, and then it expands out into the groundwater, and then is pulled back out. Now, you don't have to pull it back out. I've used Ivey saw with ISCO, and it worked tremendously. I mean, the site had free product, and I'm not overstating this. Within a month, it was entirely clean, no smell, and it never came back. And this has been a few years now. So I'm not saying it always works like that, but I'm here because I can attest to this stuff. All right, so this is okay. So for that site, removal was 3 applications in 1 week. 81% mass was a mass removal. Full-scale site remediation was realized in less than 6 months, allowing for site redevelopment of the subject area. So this was definitely a brownfield site. And Ivey saw was then employed on other OUs at the same facility. Okay, so for the second case study, this is surfactant enhanced extraction, or C. It says to expedite remediation. That's a really good point. Some sites don't necessarily require rapid remediation, and we know lots of pump and treat projects that have put a lot of us in business for a long time. But if you need to get a site closed and get it closed rapidly, you can do it relatively inexpensively by using Ivey saw as part of your process. Okay. So with this site, it was a dual-phase extraction site, groundwater flow direction to the northeast, and that's where we were. That was the performance of the system is that. Let me go back from that to that. So it worked pretty well. But then we came out and let's see. It says the influent groundwater concentration at 8,100 was the highest ever. Now that sounds counterintuitive. I mean, whoa, we jacked up the contamination. Well, what we're trying to do is liberate the contamination, right? So that's precisely what it did. And then the influent groundwater concentrations went up 400%. And that was the pilot. And then so for full scale, 3 additional wells were installed. And then a total of 5 of them were conducted to target the most heavily impacted. And that's something we typically do. Again, this is typically source area remediation. This is the typical application of Ivey saw. So the influent concentrations were up to 30,000, or 5 times the concentrations ever observed. Wow. So before application, after application. Now that was, it was 98 carbon tet reduction in the source area, in the shallow wells, and 92% carbon tet reduction in the source area DPVE wells. Significant reductions in the NAPL thickness, no measurable NAPL, last time it was tested. And the site's been closed, and that's the biggest thing of all. So the cost of Ivey saw, including delivery and taxes to site, I know somebody earlier didn't want to go into numbers, but for this particular site, and this was for full scale, it was only $20,000. So decon it and PFAS soil are two new products, and particularly decon it. It is, and all of our products are 1,4-dioxane free. They don't have PFOAs or PFASs, which is important. No dioxins, furans, PCB free. They've been tested at EPA labs, and it's been approved. The new Ivey Sol formulation is called PFAS Sol. It's effective for aiding in situ. So that is a presentation. Any questions? Yes. What was the volume? I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know that. But come to me afterwards. And speaking of that, I've got some stuff on the back table over on the right side, and you can get my card, and then I'll follow up with you on that. Okay? Yes. The specific gravity. That's a good question. I do not. Again, I will get back to you on that. If Bud was here, I'm sure he knows all those details of chemistry, and the volumes. Yes.
Are you mainly using it in the saturated zones, or can you also use it in Vadose zone?
Oh, yeah, you can use it for Vadose zone, and you can use it for ex situ applications as well. Yeah. But yes, Vadose and subsurface, yeah. And below the water, too. I like that kind of question on geology. Any more questions?
Rick, I have one.
Yeah.
So is the surfactant, the purpose is basically not to dissolve the free product, but basically to dislodge it so you can recover it?
Yeah, that was a good question. I think he knew the answer. I think he was baiting me. No, that's a good question. He asked basically if Ivey Sol dissolves it, if that's primarily what it is, or to dislodge it. Well, it does change it does cause dissolution. I mean, it causes the NAPL to go into solution, okay, so that we can pull it out. But it also dislodges it as well, and that was where when I showed the hydrophilic, the head and the tail, and yes, it does both.
So when you extract that back out, is it a single mixture?
It is a single. Yes, it is a single mixture. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. It's not in phases or separated. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
When you extract it out, what kind of treatment on the petroleum do you end up needing, since it's so well dissolved in the water? Does it go to the wastewater plant for bioremediation or oxidize?
Yeah, well, there's lots of ways you can treat it. Yeah, there's lots of ways you can treat it. I mean, basically, you treat it the way you would that substance. Anyway, I guess the root of it is the Ivey Sol itself is innocuous, and it breaks down very readily, so it won't clog up any sort of treatment method that you may use. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So
Sort of.
I guess you can't carbon treat the water now because it's not going to be very soluble.
Yeah. Let's talk about that after. Yeah, I'll get with you on that. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't want to take up too much time, but there we go.